Welcome to Veil of Humanity, where we explore the thin line between conscience, fragility, and accountability. We are your hosts, Melonie Yelvington
and Kimberly Taylor.
And today we are diving into a story that's as tragic as it is gruesome, set against the backdrop of one of America's most devastating natural disasters. And we're talking about the murder of Addie Hall by her boyfriend, Zack Bowen, in post-Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans. This case isn't just about a horrific crime. It's a window into trauma, mental health, and the fragility of the human spirit. So buckle up, because this one's going to be detailed and intense.
So grab your favorite beverage and a pillow to scream into as we take a dive into this case.
And just so y'all know, we are a fan of the cursey words. And even though we'll try our hardest not to use them, there's still maybe some that slip.
Some that, yeah, unfortunately. Trigger warnings are in place, y'all. Murder, domestic violence, body dismemberment, possible cannibalism, and of course, discussion of mental health. Okay, Bess, you ready?
Yeah, I'm always ready.
Let's start with the setting, because you can't tell this story without understanding the chaos of New Orleans in 2005. Hurricane Katrina hit on August 29, 2005 as a Category 3 storm, causing massive flooding after the levees broke. And if y'all didn't know, New Orleans is below sea level. It's a great city. I highly recommend anybody if you've never been. Wonderful food. It's a little dirty, but hey, I haven't seen a city that's not. But it is fascinating history, from voodoo to this. They say this is the place where vampires still live. So, even though there's really no such thing as vampires, they say they do live there. But I have a fascination with New Orleans. Over 1,800 people died in this, and the city was left in ruins. Power out, no clean water, looting, and a sense of total abandonment by the government. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole if you've never been down the Hurricane Katrina thing. In the French Quarter, which was on the higher ground and somewhat spared from the worst flooding, a small community of holdouts emerged, surviving on grit and whatever they could scavenge. At this point, we're going to enter the characters. Zack Bowen and Addie Hall. Zack was 28 years old, a tall, charismatic guy from California who'd served in the military. He was an Iraq War veteran. He had been deployed to Kosovo and then Iraq, where he saw heavy combat. Zack worked as a bartender in the French Quarter and had a young daughter from a previous marriage. Addie, she was 30. She was a free-spirited poet and dance teacher. She also was bartending just to make ends meet. She was known for her artistic soul, her love of animals, and a bit of a wild streak. She'd been arrested before for just minor things like public intoxication. They had met in the summer of 2005, just weeks before Katrina. They met at a bar that they both worked. Their relationship moved fast. It was fueled by this impending storm. When evacuation orders came, most people fled, but Zack and Addie decided to ride it out together in her apartment, which was at 826 North Rampart Street. It's right on the edge of the French Quarter, which I believe it's included on one of the ghost tours current, and you can actually go visit.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. They stocked up on their supplies, they barricaded the doors, and they just hunkered down. As the winds howled, the city flooded, their bond deepened. They later described it as falling deeply in love amid the apocalypse.
How romantic.
Hey, I've read enough apocalypse books that love is possible. It's possible. Yeah. So, post Katrina New Orleans was like a ghost town. No electricity, no police presence initially, and you had those survivors like Zack and Addie who became local legends. They biked around the empty streets, bartered for food, and even hosted impromptu parties with other holdouts. Media outlets caught wind of all of this. You know, the New York Times featured them as symbols of their resilience. Zack, he was photographed on a balcony with a sign saying, "Come and get us." And Addie was quoted saying they were living like kings and queens in the abandoned city. But, there's always a but somewhere, isn't there?
Always.
Beneath that romantic facade, cracks were forming. You know, Zack was dealing with untreated PTSD from his time in Iraq, and if you know anything about the Gulf War, Iraqi War, even with current happenings now in March of 2026, you know, there's not enough resources for our veterans, and the PTSD that some of these came home with it's devastating and heartbreaking.
Yeah.
You know, he'd seen his friends die, he guarded prisons, and he carried the weight of war. Addie, you know, she had her own demons, including she had a history of abusive relationships and possible bipolar disorder, though that was never confirmed. You know, that was just kind of like her friends, you know, because, again, when we haven't been talking about somebody, you're kind of bipolar, aren't you? But, you know. As the city slowly came back to life in the fall of 2005, Zack and Addie, they tried to rebuild. They moved into that same apartment on Rampart Street. They were paying rent with what little they had. Zack, he got a job delivering for a local grocery, and Addie continued teaching dance. But by this point, you know, the honeymoon phase faded, and it was quickly getting worse. You know, friends reported constant arguments, loud, physical fights. Addie accused Zack of cheating, and he felt she was controlling and manipulative. You know, there were allegations of infidelity on both sides, and in one instance, she reportedly threw his belongings out the window during a rage.
Wow.
I mean, I can't say I've never thought about doing something like that, but it's...
no comment.
No comment on that one. You know, his mental health was deteriorating and just going downhill fast. You know, he was confiding in friends about nightmares from the war, from the storm. You know, it was just, everything was kind of ramping up at this point. Things escalated in the months leading up to the murder. On October 4, 2006, which was just a day before the crime, Addie had went to their landlord to have Zack removed from the lease, claiming he was abusive. You know, he found this out, and he was absolutely devastated. You know, he felt betrayed, which
But she can't do that either. She can't just go and say remove him.
Yeah.
On a lease.
But, and, you know, in your mind, you're thinking, oh, I want him gone, but eviction laws.
She thought there might have been something she could do, maybe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that night, or early the next morning of October 5th, 2006, in a fit of rage, Zack strangled Addie to death in their apartment. But what happened next is what makes this case so infamous and stomach churning.
Oh boy, here we go.
So, big trigger warning here, people. I'm just letting y'all know it's gonna get graphic. After killing Addie, Zack didn't immediately turn himself in, which, by the way, how many people do you know murder somebody and then just go, hey?
Very few.
Very few.
Yeah.
Instead, he spent the next several days with her body.
Ugh.
He dismembered her in the bathtub using a hacksaw and knives. He separated her head, arms, legs, and torso.
Okay.
Then, and it still gets worse from here. In a horrifying twist, he placed her head in a pot on the stove, along with her hands and feet in another pot, as if cooking them.
Oh my Lord.
Yeah. We got a Jeffrey Dahmer situation going.
Apparently so.
So her legs and arms were in turkey basting trays in the oven, sprinkled with seasoning like thyme and oregano.
You cannot make this up.
No.
Thyme and oregano. Wow.
I mean, there's seasoning.
He was serious.
You know, the torso was stuffed into a black plastic bag in the refrigerator.
Golly.
You know, whew. Zack later confessed in his notes that he had sexually assaulted her body post-mortem and even tasted parts of it. Although, you know, the forensic evidence on cannibalism is debated on this. That's why I put it in the trigger warnings, but at the same time, it's still kind of like...
You said possible.
Possible.
Yeah.
Some sources say the body parts were charred, but not necessarily eaten. So it's... During those 4 days, Zack went about his life somewhat normally. I mean, as normal as I guess you can call it. I wouldn't say that chopping up a body is normal, but...
Not by any means.
But again, if you're familiar with any apocalypse books, this is kind of, this shit happens.
Yeah.
You know, he partied with friends, he visited bars, and even seemed like he was in good spirits to some people. But he was unraveling. He spray painted messages on the apartment walls like, "I'm a total failure," and "Look in the oven."
Mm.
You know, along with a lot of anti-war slogans and references to his military service. You know, he wrote a detailed suicide note in a journal where he confessed to the murder and even explained his actions. In it, he said he killed Addie to end her suffering, and these are in quotation marks, but admitted it was out of anger over her trying to evict him. Yeah. Over an eviction.
Wow.
He described the dismemberment as a way to make sure she was dead and to delay discovery.
Good Lord,
To
dude.
make sure that she was dead.
That's so sad because this is not the first PTSD
No.
story, you know, that you hear about. I don't understand why they don't get help whenever they come back.
There's just not enough, and there's really not enough resources out there. But again, if anybody is suffering from mental health issues, PTSD, anything, please, 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 I cannot stress it enough to get help.
Yeah.
I can't. We'll even include resources and stuff if you need that. Please, please, please. Reach out, talk to somebody, go to the hospital, something, please.
Yeah.
On October 17th, 2006, 12 days after the murder, Zack checked into the Omni Royal Orleans Hotel in the French Quarter. You know, he went to the rooftop bar, had a few drinks, and then he jumped from the 7th floor parking garage next to the hotel.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well.
His body landed on the street below, and the police were called around 8:30 p.m. In his pockets, they found his dog tags, a key to the apartment, and the suicide note that would direct them back to that North Rampart Street apartment where when they would go in, they would find her remains.
Mm.
The note said, and he wrote this out, "This is not accidental. I had to take my own life to pay for the one I took."
Ooh, you should have left that up to God.
Yeah.
My goodness.
So, police arrived at the apartment, and they were met with a scene straight out of a horror movie. The smell was overwhelming. Decomp mixed with cooked flesh.
Mm.
They found the pots in the stove, still warm, according to some reports. Again, though,
It might be exaggerated a little.
Exactly. Inside the fridge, they found her torso with the identifying tattoos that she had. On the counter was his journal with 12 pages of confession detailing the timeline.
Oh, wow.
He strangled her around 1 a.m. on October 5th, dismembered her over the next few days, and even cleaned the apartment somewhat. I can see the train of thought on that one.
Wow, why are we clean? That's what making me think. The PTSD is one thing, but we're not getting. Oh my gosh, it's just such a difficult, the mental health aspect.
If you're gonna clean up the crime scene but leave the body there,
Yeah. It's just because that tells you right there, though, he's not thinking.
He was not thinking
straight.
Yeah, that
at all.
Yeah, that mind, there was a lot going on.
Yeah, it's like doing drugs and then forgetting
what you're doing,
yeah.
and things you've done and said, and
what you started and then walked away and got distracted.
Exactly. There was also photos that he had took of the body parts, which he then developed at a local pharmacy.
Holy cow!
Which is really insane. I can't imagine.
When did the people
when they
see that?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And the fact that he still had a camera in 2005 that developed film is pretty impressive, to be honest. For you young people, film cameras used to take film and you'd have to physically take it somewhere to have it developed.
Yeah, there wasn't no taking it to the...
There wasn't no just instantly
Walgreens.
clicking it. And
digital prints.
And from the 1900s, be nice, y'all. The investigation wrapped up quickly since, his confession left little doubt on what happened, who did it, Autopsy confirmed that she died from strangulation. There was no drug or alcohol in her system at the time. He did have alcohol in his. But, it was known that he had gone to that bar and drank before he decided to jump.
I'm assuming they had him on camera there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, the case shocked New Orleans. They were already traumatized by Katrina. And then, a domestic violence turn, get him off the leash, the victim, just turned into one horrific situation into another.
Yeah.
It became a symbol of the hidden toll of the disaster. PTSD from the storm compounded by war trauma. Zack had sought help from the VA but was waitlisted, which you see more and more. And then Addie had her own mental health struggles, but there was no formal diagnosis in her records.
I think the VA should waitlist based on people's issues. Someone who's just coming in,
fresh.
Yeah, because they want to be able to just go to the doctor. That's one thing. But people that are dealing with mental health stuff, they should get first dibs, in my opinion.
I agree with that. And this aftermath, friends and family were just absolutely devastated. Zack's ex-wife, her name was Lana. She was the mother of his child. She spoke about his untreated PTSD. Addie's family remembered her as vibrant and kind. The apartment, and like I was saying, it's become a weird tourist attraction now. And yeah, I am guilty because I love going and exploring cemeteries and things like that. And I've been to like memorials and death museums. I've been to Alcatraz. We're all guilty of it. It's fascinating to see things,
Yeah. It's history.
It is. And like I was saying, ghost tours stop by this apartment. They claim that it's haunted. There's a book by Ethan Brown. It's called Shake the Devil Off, and it dives deep into this. It's arguing it's more about systemic failures, veterans care, disaster response, which Katrina was a huge disaster response with FEMA and everything. And it's more than just a cannibal murder tabloid story.
Mm-hmm.
But again, this case, it raises big questions, How much did Katrina's chaos contribute? Because they were living in like we've said, a post-apocalyptic setting. Was Zack's war experience the breaking point? Or was it a toxic relationship that just kind of pushed everything over that edge? Experts point to complex PTSD where, multiple traumas lead to explosive violence. It's a reminder that behind every headline is a web of human suffering.
Yep.
Except for Casey Anthony.
Yeah. She's insufferable. Again,
My opinion on that one. So if you're struggling with mental health, please reach out. There's sources, and National Suicide Prevention Lifeline are there. And just a little thing for our listeners who they want to go on a deep dive of this. Some key resources, the story of Zack and Addie on Ghost City Tours website. There is a Medium's article on the gruesome tale of Zack Brown and Addie Hall. ABC News has done stories of grisly New Orleans murder. Again, Ethan Brown's book. There's multiple Reddit discussions. There's podcasts. I think even Bailey Sarian, one of our favorites, has covered this. So, again, like we say with all of them, take a look at it. Deep dive, go down. Again, we'd love to hear from you on that one. But again, what do you think on that one? You never truly know what's going on behind closed doors in a closed, in a relationship. So,
that's right.
Whew. Okay, y'all.
Time to woosah?
Time to woosah. Let's breathe it out.
Woosah.
I want to thank y'all for listening. I want you to stay curious, stay safe, and be aware. Alright, my crime crazy people, we will be back next week with a brand new episode. To see all of our source material, please consult the show notes. Don't forget to click that subscribe follow button and catch us on our social medias, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and the TikTok at Veil of Humanity Podcast.
The TikTok.
The TikTok. Reviews do help us get out there, so please, if you can, leave us a 5-star review. Just let us know how we're doing. Also, if you have any questions, you want to provide feedback, or you have a case suggestion, please send us an email at veilofhumanity@gmail.com. Hosted by Kimberly Taylor and Melonie Yelvington. Produced and edited by Courtney Santos. Music by Mayu and Luke Joe on YouTube. A Bronx Bay production. Okay, Bronx. Tell the people we will see them again next week.
Ooh.